So the next thing I'm going to want to do is crossfade between a couple of movies. So I'm going to change this network a little bit, stick in another movie in top, and then throw in a composite. No, cross, I think is what I want. It is. Hook those bad boys up, and then hook that up to final. And then for right now, I'm just going to load a different movie in just by going to File, hitting the plus sign on one of the movie ends.
There's a whole bunch of them on the desktop.
Oh, there is? Okay, great.
So go to desktop, and go into MUTEK Touch Designer folder.
No.
Go in there and go into the
Training to...
Vimeo, for instance. Just take that.
There we go.
Second and third movie or something like that, whatever.
Orchard. Oh, beautiful. Okay, great. So I'm just going to fill these for right now, but we'll set up something to kind of change them dynamically later. So we have our movies playing. You can see if I go into cross, I can crossfade as would be expected. One of the things that we'll want to set up is some sort of method to do, this crossfade. And to do that, I'm going to use a chop. I'm going to put in a null for right now called crossfade, I suppose. Just because I'm going to stick several different types of things into here to control the crossfade. For right now, I'm just going to use a constant. Stick it into this null. So yesterday we got into chop exporting a bit. And so one method to do this would be to click the viewer active button, grab my channel name and my crossfade, and pull it over into my cross variable and say export chop. Then boom, if I change my constant at that point, go back to the constant parameter page, you'll see the crossfades linked up. You can tell by the arrow and clearly because it's crossfading. But there are a couple of other ways to do this. We saw also yesterday that there's this little pink button that reveals a DAT. Once you export the chop. So did everybody get that the whole chop exporting thing? How to do that UI wise? You just grab the channel name and bring it down, drop it in. And actually, if you can either drop it onto the name and the parameter page, or even if you just drag it onto the operator itself, it'll give you some options on potential places you could export it to. So there's one method, and if I, the DAT's here, so you can see kind of what's going on with this export. I could even go in here, set my active tab, and set enable to 0. And modify these so now my export's stopped. So these things are all modifiable. But so this exporting chops in this manner is kind of a push way to get variables places. You're sending out from a chop. And there's another method which I personally prefer, which is to grab things from where you want them and pull them back in a different way. So I'm going to get rid of my export here for a second. And actually, if I do the same type of command, if I grab my channel, drop my channel in, and instead of going to export chop, I can go to relative chop reference. So you can see that I'm still, at that point, I get this rather interesting little snippet of text in the box there, and you can tell my crossfade is still working. So what's going on here? We have just encountered what may be our first use of an expression. This expression is, I guess, one I use the most anyway, called chop, and it grabs a channel from a chop and brings it into whatever box you're looking at. So I wouldn't necessarily have to have exported with the UI in the way I did. if I were just 0 here, I can go in and type chop, parenthesis, then the either relative or absolute path to the chop channel that I want to grab. In this case, it's in my current directory, so I don't have to have any path. I can just say crossfade and then the name of the channel, which is channel 1. Closing quote, parentheses, boom, and there I am. If your chop is in the same kind of, visually is in the same kind of place, that you are, it makes a lot of sense just to grab it and pull it in. I prefer to see where I'm getting things on my receiving end instead of modifying things on my sending end. Doing something like, I'll be in my cross and I'll wonder where that's coming from. And again, the potential here is that my chop channel doesn't have to be, isn't sitting right next to my crossfader.
So when you use expressions, it opens up a lot more possibilities. So when you actually type in chop and you've got the name there, now you're in expression mode. You can actually type math in. So if at the last second you're like, I want to multiply that value by 2, you can just type that in, *2, or you can times it by like a sine function if you want to. You can write full algebra equations and functions inside of your parameter string. So it's generally not a super good idea to do tons of math inside of there because it's like obfuscated, and somebody looking at the network might not realize that there's all this complexity in there, but it can be useful in a pinch to make last-minute tweaks and adjustments to things. It is more idiomatic to do all of that stuff in the chop chain that you're working with, so that it's all exposed with operators. But it is a flexible way to do things.
I'll tell you, normally the reason I use, that's one very good reason, is because you can make longer expressions that include this chop channel. So this is a very simple example. Another reason I end up doing it this way is because I know in my head where all this stuff is, and it's simply faster to type this in than it is to navigate all the way back and do a new export. So we've gotten to expressions. So now I think is a good time to open back up our text port that we got to at the end of yesterday. If you go to dialogues, the second thing down is text port and DATs, and you'll find your text port window comes up. So again, this is a command line interface into Touch Designer. There are 2 major classes of things you'll be using, commands and expressions. So commands and expressions. Commands are things that are like an actionable thing to do. You tell it to do something. Expressions are more like chop. This is an expression, and it's a function that kind of acts on data or pulls something from somewhere.
A command changes something, and an expression retrieves information about something. So there's tons of expressions that you can use to pull values from chops, pull parameters from objects or geometry transforms. You can do that with DATs. There's a list. If you look in the help, there's but the commands you use to do things like send information somewhere, to create an operator, to turn cooking on and off. You can echo, you can print, you can create debug statements and trace things out into the text port. Sorry, what did you say?
Change parameter up arms.
Yeah, you can use up arms to change parameters, set parameters.
Yeah, show that.
Yeah.
So the first, starting with commands, the first command we're going to want to learn is, oops, I didn't have the right window selected, so I messed around there. But the first command we're going to want to learn is help. If you type help, you're going to get a list of all of the commands available. If you type, for example, if I take echo, which is the same thing as sort of print. So if I were to type echo, something, I'm going to get something back echoed to me in the text port after I've typed it. But if for some reason I don't know what echo does because I've never seen it before, I can type help echo, and you'll get a useful sort of output of some syntax on using it, and it's optional and required, arguments. Similarly, if we type a command called x help, we get a list of all of the expressions that are available. You can see on here is chop, and if I were to type x help chop, I get evaluates the channel within a chop at the current time. And there's an example of using it, which we have seen previously. So this is kind of your dictionary of possible things to do, and I don't know any way to kind of get your head around this besides just read it every once in a while and get the help on an expression you haven't used.
In the wiki, there's the Sweet 16 chop expressions and Sweet 16 commands. Those are the first 16 you should learn out of each category.
So if I go up here and click wiki, boom.
Yeah, so the wiki page called a category called commands. If you go to categories and go to commands, you'll see the most used ones out of the command set, and the same thing goes with expressions. The most common ones here. So even though the whole list might be overwhelming, this is 95% of what I use.
Yeah. And you can see we've already used chop.
What's that first one? And what about commands? What's the top couple of them?
Top couple, probably tab or tab cell. No, op-harm tab cell.
Tab cell, yeah.
Set, echo.
Yeah.
And the other thing about the text port that's important is that's going to be our console window and kind of debugging tool to see when things go wrong with our expressions. If I were to have a typo or type something wrong, your error message is going to show up here in the text port, so it's important to know it's there. The other thing that we'll want to kind of get our heads around when we start scripting is the variables again. There's a variables window if you either hit Alt-V or go down to from your text port menu item. Then you get a window with all the currently defined variables. There are several levels of scoped variables in Touch Designer. So you can only access a variable within the scope with which you have declared it. There are many variables that can be accessed from anywhere in your network. These are the root variables, the environment variables, the built-in variables. You can kind of get these guys from anywhere in your network. The component variables, on the other hand, are the ones that are local to the current component that you happen to be in, which can be very useful because if you have multiple components, you can use the same variable names for functionally identical purposes.
And you just have to put a $sign in front of whatever word shows up here to be able to use it.
So if I were to say reference, I'm just going to make another constant right now to show this fact. If I were going to go into the constant and type in, $AF, say, which is absolute frame, then I get my frame number. If I did $cook rate, there's my 60 frames a second, or 60 hertz cook rate. And so you can, we'll be referencing, for example, here's my project variables. So what I would like to do is have these movies loop and crossfade between each other when they loop. So kind of have them in a line, and then when one movie ends, do a crossfade into the other movie and have them, keep cycling without having to go to After Effects and stitch them together and bring them back in or something like that. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of these chops for right now. And actually, that's a good thing to do because you'll see here on cross 1, I have my alarming symbol again. If I click on it, you'll see this white box appear with a whole bunch of information on what's going on in the top currently. The important thing here is the warning which says the specified path is invalid, because this chop reference that we've made no longer has anything to reference to. So it's nice, it'll tell you, if it is expecting some sort of control signal or other information that it can't find. That's kind of the purpose of that very alarming yellow triangle. So to functionally achieve this crossfade based on the transport of my movies, one of the things that I'm going to need to know is the length of my movies and where in my movie's timeline I'm currently at, so that when one is ending, I can elegantly crossfade into my other movie. To achieve this, I'm going to use a chop called the info chop, which when you make it seems fairly uninspiring, but if I were to drag one of my movie files onto it, then we see all sorts of information about what's going on inside my movie. The current index, the normalized fraction of where I'm at in my movie file, its resolution, its sample rate, and some information on the status of reading those movie files. Whether it's open, its length. And so one of the things that we're wanting to get is, actually I could use index fraction. I'm sorry, which one?
Cook time.
Oh, cook time?
This is the time it takes to do the movie in on the CPU side only, not on the GPU side, but it's number of milliseconds that it takes to cook the node.
Yeah, I mean, every time one of these operators does whatever processing it needs to do, that action of doing its job is it cooking. And so this cook time is the time in milliseconds it's taken to do whatever its job happens to be. That gets useful particularly when we build extremely complex networks and run into kind of CPU and GPU overhead issues. Then you can go in and see the types of things that are taking up most of your time and try and optimize them. So here, it kind of depends on whether I wanted to specify my crossfade in frames or as a percentage. I think for here, I'm going to do it in frames. And so the two things that I'll need for that calculation are the length of the movie and the current position in the movie, which is up here at the top, index.
Okay.
Stop here, and then we'll come back around later today and do some scripting to make this thing crossfade how we wanted it to.